All right, Lewis, what's on the front of the Telegraph?
Well, it's the Daily Telegraph, and it says lockdown benefits, quote, a drop in the bucket compared to the costs. Like quelle surprise, I think the French would say.
Excellent French.
We've been saying it for years. I mean, I'm glad the Telegraph is getting on this on this COVID denialism. What would you call it? Would you call it a COVID denialism bandwagon? I don't remember them being that gung-ho, saying it was a load of Nonsense. Thank you for putting the word in my mouth. Load of nonsense. At the time, I did, and I was one of the first people to tweet this.
Yes, I was very early as well. I was on a certain radio station, we won't name, but a station. I was talking about it a lot with Mr. Mark Dolan. You were talking about it. How about you, Paul? Were you quite...
No, I wasn't. Do you know what? I'll come to this in a sec. I wasn't actually. So I wasn't someone who... I was kind of agnostic at first. I sat back and waited. I didn't understand enough. So when we went into lockdown, I actually had COVID. So, ironically, just had it on that week in March of 2020. So it was all a bit of a blur for me. So I felt like I couldn't get to grips with it all. I didn't really know what was going on. But for me, this. I know it's in the Telegraph, but this should be an apolitical story. The outrage should be ubiquitous across the whole demographic of everybody. Now, this is not about denying COVID or denying anything. This is about looking... I wish they'd frame it slightly differently, because they say compared to the cost. Now, you can take cost to mean almost anything. It's saying there were only 1,700 deaths. Now, there's a lot of emotion involved in 1,700 deaths, so you can't call that a cost in a financial term, because I don't think you can quantify it.
Yes, you can.
Well, OK, but I don't think you can. However, one thing I would say is it's quite clearly the evidence has been there for a long time. It was there by the end of the first lockdown that what we were doing was going to be more problematic in the long term than it would have been solving problems in the short.
You know what? I'm sorry. You're agnostic. But, I mean, at the time, I actually said this is going to cost... And at the time, I meant March. I said this is going to cost way more. And because, basically, this guy, Neil Ferguson, who a lot of people out there know, he's the guy behind the Neil Ferguson effect, or the Ferguson-Neil effect. There's a bit of a debate of whether it's called. It's when somebody is considered to be the leader, the most important person in his field, who's got total credentials, is the biggest idiot.
Yeah, you mentioned that the other night, and I agree. But, yeah, so it's a pretty devastating study. It's from Johns Hopkins and London University. Presumably know what they're doing. They've examined 20,000 studies, so I suppose it's a meta-study. And we never had a cost-benefit analysis, and this was the thing. Yeah. And only later, much later, did people start talking about that, The Spectator. Yeah. Early on would be people like the Daily Skeptic, more alternative sort of media, and people like Jay Bhattacharya, Carl Hennigan, experts raising questions. We've never really had a proper inquiry. Even the lockdown files didn't sort of go anywhere. They had a bit of an impact, but it hasn't really been taken up. And now you've got this Baroness Hallett, who's got this inquiry. The government are even trying to make things difficult for her. So I'm very disturbed by the fact we've never really reckoned with lockdowns, and the fact that it's only been dealt with in the Telegraph. And now it's apparently some sort of right-wing issue, which is bizarre.
Well, this is what
there's a massive wealth transfer to the already very wealthy.
I totally agree. That's what... And fair play to the Telegraph, and that's why I think this should become apolitical. I can't see why The Guardian can't be talking about this as well. They should absolutely be talking about the cost of assault, and we're not going to find out. I think we're all invested in this, by the way, left and right, in finding out the truth behind what brought about everything that happened during the lockdowns. And it's going to get pushed out into the long grass, and by the time we actually find out, the people in charge will be in the Lords. Yeah. It won't really matter any longer.
You know what? You're expecting there to be it's all going to come out. It was all out there.
Yeah,
everybody knew. Not everybody knew, but there was enough data at the time in March to know that this was going to be a bad thing, and they didn't investigate it. And is it a left or a right issue? Well, they've decided that masks are left and no masks are right. So this is obviously a right issue. This isn't. I think.
Right. And the mainstream media also has a lot to answer for. Not GB, of course, but all these peston-type people who didn't ask the right question. Their only question was, why aren't we locking down longer and harder? And it's like a real failure.